Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're talking about mental conditions and Indigenous practitioners. So, mental conditions are common amongst Indigenous practitioners. And as an anthropologist focusing on Indigenous practitioners' well-being, I've had and witnessed countless phenomena related to mental illness. Apart from peculiar behavior with incidents such as seeing ghosts, gods, or the devil, like screaming, running, or withdrawing from the public altogether to places that are unreachable. There are other common conditions that Indigenous practitioners experience, such as depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, insomnia, amongst others. So these conditions can be so severe sometimes to a point that they disrupt their whole way of life. So they end up losing their means of income sometimes, their families, and even their lives. You know, some of them have found themselves committing suicide because of these conditions. So it's common to think that well-being practitioners, including Indigenous practitioners, don't suffer from health or mental health conditions because, they work with them. But the truth is, if you are experiencing these things, you lose all sense of self and your ability to heal. So you find yourself in this inescapable void. So what complicates things even more for Indigenous healers is that their mental conditions are often related to their spiritual calling, therefore can't be diagnosed or treated using neurocentric methods. Sometimes these methods accelerate these conditions and make a person worse. Therefore, this series aims to tackle some of the issues that Indigenous practitioners experience that are related to mental health, like their causes and what can be done in situations where Indigenous practitioners find themselves experiencing mental conditions. So here today, we have Brother Menzi Maseko and Sister Tokozo Mumano, who are both Indigenous healers and leaders in the sector. So they will share with us their own thoughts and maybe their experiences when it comes to this matter or the experiences of people that they know. To start with, we will have our Sister Ndokozo Mumano share her thoughts with us. Thank you. Sister Ndokozo, over to you.
Good evening to all podcast listeners and good evening to my colleagues Lindelwa Nlele and Menzi Maseko. The angle that I will be coming at in terms of in our societies and the trauma, a lot of the trauma is generationally based, as in like when you hear the stories about your father, he had trauma. When he tells you about his father, there's trauma. So there's a line of trauma, and as a person who's an Indigenous healer, you're also carrying these people because these ancestral people that also have all of this trauma that's generational are on your shoulders. So whatever they feel, you feel, because you sort of like have an empathetic relationship with them where you can feel their energies as much as they can feel yours. So when you have your own anxieties and your own stresses and your own illness of mental illness, there's also their traumas coming to fore because they are coming through you. So you kind of inheriting that trauma in a spiritual sense. So it's that much worse for you. When you think it's not just your thoughts, it's also messages coming from a spiritual realm coming through you. So that can also create anxiety within your brain because now you're overthinking because it's not just your thoughts, it's the thoughts of many people that came before you and they all want to express themselves and get themselves through to you. So there's a lot that is going on inside your mind that other people cannot see, but that is very real to you because you can see, feel, and hear it. So a lot of it is based on all of those traumas coming to fore and them manifesting themselves in depression, anxiety, imposter syndrome, and the many other various mental illnesses that come into power. So I think for me, that's what I think is the root cause of the problem. If we can sort out our childhood traumas and be able to deal with them, it could be easier to try and avoid having so much mental illness within the sector.
Thank you, Sister Dogoza. That's very well said. I think that's something that most of us don't think about, that the conditions that we are carrying are not just our own, but they are passed down through our lineage, and also not just like through like as in the other conditions of our ancestors or the conditions that our ancestors were experiencing, but also the people that are living in our times now. So we also sometimes find ourselves carrying the weight of our mothers and our fathers and our siblings and even like our whole communities, you know. So yeah, that has an impact on our well-being, especially like our mental health. So over to you, Brother Mati.
Greetings, everyone. Sanibonani, siyanibingelela. This what Ntokozo is laying forth here, what is bringing forth is very important, because I would speak just for now from a Black consciousness, Pan-Africanist perspective, to say that a lot of the trauma is not just genealogical, just so good to know, ufuzo, which is inheritance, you know. It is actually inherited from a colonial situation whereby we've been traumatized physically for many, many years, for centuries. So this physical trauma of my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother and my grandmother. For example, my grandmother used to tell me about the kind of treatment they used to receive in the farms, Newcastle, where they come from. You know, my grandmother on the paternal side. And then when I hear my mother telling me that my father suffered from mental illness, certain mental illnesses that were never, what's the word, that were never diagnosed and treated properly. People would simply basically pray over these things. I can just connect the dots and look at myself and look at my family and say, so that's where that comes from. So we do not know what kind of trauma my grandmother felt when she was pregnant with my father. You may find that that trauma was passed on. By the way, the abuser, whoever, the colonial abuser, may also have carried some trauma. You can imagine now if a traumatized person passes on their trauma to a person who's supposed to be living their life normally and working. So it's passed on. So we not only as Indigenous workers and Indigenous healers, we not only inherit the trauma of our bloodline, we also inherit the trauma that is passed on to us from other bloodlines. You know, in the Sangoma healing space, they speak about a lot about Amandau and Milozi, right? So when you speak about Amandau, you are speaking about foreign spirit. In the Christian sense, foreign spirit is something like should be totally avoided. But the beauty of the Indigenous space, African Indigenous Nguni space specifically, is that we confront things and we try to get to the bottom of them and the root of them for what they are, rather than try to subdue and put things in the trash can or under the carpet. We try to understand these things holistically by consulting and confronting them. So mental illness can really manifest from those things. Even the work itself, doing the work, in the process of doing the work, you find yourself traumatized, because it's a lot of trauma that I've heard, because I'm not a Sangoma, but a lot of trauma that I've heard from a Sangoma is the fact that they experience a lot of trauma during the initiation from their gobelas, from their abusive gobelas, or gobelas who thinking they are just being strict, but they are not being strict. They are now being just blatantly abusive. Sometimes they don't even recognize that they are doing so, but sometimes it's just sadism. Some people are sadistic like that. Or I suffered from my gobela, so you must suffer too. So now imagine now that person has to pass on that same emotion that is bottled up and pass it on to someone who is a stranger coming for healing. So that's why it's important to actually talk about these things and get to the bottom of them in a holistic way.
Thank you so much. I know about like Amandili being foreign spirits, and there are rituals that are performed, because sometimes you find people is experiencing these mental conditions, and they seem to be related to a calling, but they actually just Amandili, so they're possessed by these foreign spirits that are not supposed to be there. So there are rituals that are supposed to cleanse people and remove, yes, Amandili. And I think sometimes what happens, especially now with all these initiations that are happening, that you find that a person would experience that they would have like Amandili, but whoever they go to, maybe Ikobela Corner, because they want to benefit in some way or the other, they end up, yes, so they don't understand it, so they end up initiating them into a path. And that all means then they continue, yes, experiencing these conditions because they were not meant to be. To begin with, it's just the person that they consulted with that didn't have enough knowledge or understanding of what they were going through. So yeah, I just want to touch. You talked a lot about the relationship between Ikobela and the initiates. Yeah, that kind of reminded me of some of the stories that have been circulating related to Ama initiates. Like there are young peoples in Eastern Cape, Eastern Cape and here in KZN as well, that have reported to have committed suicide because of mental issues, of course. And now with those issues, they're somewhat not necessarily related to Ikobela and the initiates, but it's still something that young initiates find themselves experiencing, like in schools where they are being bullied and they're not allowed to wear their regalia. Yeah, so these pupils that ended up committing suicide, the stories that they were suspended from school because they were not, they couldn't take off their regalia, so they were not allowed to wear them at school. So since they couldn't, then the principals made the decision to you that they needed to be like suspended from attending classes and being in school. So I'm pretty sure that those incidents are not unique to those particular pupils that ended up committing suicide. So what do we say to things like that? Like what kind of advice can we give to pupils who are finding themselves in this state? Can we just like talk a bit, especially you, Sister Dogozo, because you had your calling when you were in school, and can you just talk to us a bit about the experiences that you had and how they affected you, and what we need to kind of think about when we come across such things?
Okay, for me, during my schooling times, I wasn't exactly, I mean, I knew deep down that there was something different about me than other people, but I hadn't understood it as Uguti Nginobizo, I understood it as just I'm weird, I'm always yawning really loud all the time. And I always see things that I don't understand. I dream things that happen. So I first thing, I feared sleeping because of the things I would see when I sleep. So I would do, I even developed insomnia because I just couldn't sleep, because I knew that if I close my eyes, I'm going to see these horrible things that I see in my dreams. So that in itself was very stressful, because when I have to go to school in the morning, I'm tired because I wasn't sleeping. And even if I was sleeping, in the dreams I was fighting. So I'm waking up, I'm also tired. So there's that. And then when I get to school, even the way that I yawn, it's not going to be a quiet yawn. It's like a really loud yawn that the whole class can hear. And my teachers often would say, "You're so disruptive. Why are you so disruptive in my class? You don't have to yawn that loud." Because for them, it was something that even now I didn't get it, but it just happened. For them, it was worse because it was like, how this girl, she's smart, she gets good marks, she's not even naughty. Got the man for no reason. It was people thought I was this weird person, So I often felt misunderstood and alienated. Even having friends wasn't easy because they also didn't understand me as much as I would like to be understood. So there was a lot of isolation and loneliness, sort of, I can say. So yeah, I think yeah, that's what I can say.
Mm. Brother Minzy, do you have anything to say to that?
The isolation. I'd like to, take this to a, I think we've had this conversation before, maybe between the three of us, I think, when on a different platform. But for me, it's a recurring thing. That the twasa, okay, let me put it this way. In a general sense, umuntu othwasayo unengulo, uyagula. Suke egula, and then kumele ahambe to do certain rituals to remove first ingulo, because ingulo is like the portal, it's the door, it's the difficulty it's the mountain that you must climb so that you can get to your summit. And then when you get to your summit, by the way, going up is difficult, but also going down is difficult, right? So you summit, and then now you have to go down. Where are you going to? You're going to other people. Right. So, and other people, those who understand will receive you with respect, and those who are majority who don't understand will ostracize you, will make you feel lonely, will just, there'll be no understanding. And already we said we are living in a colonial society, what is called a neo-colonial society, where most of our people, especially our families, are in a different faith. Even though this thing that we are, being African, is not really a faith. It is just a way of being for us. It's like, how this should be normal. But people of faith believe that things should be in a particular way according to a certain book. So you'll get trauma mostly from the family. So I wanted to raise the issue of the fact that the artist and the healer also goes through the same gulo and the same rejection and the same weirdness, because the artist is a lot of the time, it's only now that you say a lot of cool artists, they're just cool, they fit in, but in general sense and in historical sense, an artist and the sangoma or the traditional healer of any kind will always, or the dreamer or the seer, whatever, would always find themselves the outlier in society, and outliers are persecuted by the authorities, and that persecution brings in a lot of trauma, and because sometimes the trauma is institutionalized, and when it's institutionalized, you can even end up in jail, you can end up in a mental institution, or you can end up getting medication from these institutions, getting medication from doctors that don't understand what you're going through. They think it's paranoia, or it's schizophrenia, or it's this or that. They can't get to the bottom of it. So they will misdiagnose you. So the mental illness and the physical illness will go together. You find yourself just very, very sick. So it's important to actually create those spaces, what is called safe spaces, for people to grow and not feel rejected.
Yeah, I think you've touched on something very important there. The fact that if you are different, like in society, and you don't necessarily adhere to like normal or social norms, then automatically you find yourself being alienated, and sometimes that alienation goes as far as being like a harassment or just like ill treatment in general. So now I'm just thinking about the practitioners now, like people who have been pushing, like advocating for Indigenous practices and trying to open up spaces to engage around these issues, trying to bring about the awareness of the role of Indigenous knowledge systems in our society, like how they are being treated and what that does to them. Because I don't know, you can correct me here, both of you, if I'm wrong, but from my own experiences, I have found that being an advocate for Indigenous systems it's very difficult, and it has a negative impact or influence on a lot of like social aspects, in one's life. And yeah, sometimes you find yourself experiencing all these things like anxiety, like depression as a person, because also there's that sense to why is it that these people just don't get me, they don't want to get allow me to take up these spaces, or they don't want to support this cause, especially since we know and understand because what we're doing is so important. So as practitioners themselves, people that have been in the sector for a long time, what have been your experiences? Maybe not necessarily your experiences, but like just like the conversations that have been happening in the sector related to that, to Indigenous practices, and of being a practitioner within the Indigenous sector, like how people from outside, like other sectors, treat people who are Indigenous practitioners or leaders in the sector, and also the people within the sector, themselves. How do they treat each other in relation to well-being? How that treatment actually influences or affects their well-being. Yes, Ntokozo.
I'm gonna tell like a sort of like a story of something that will illustrate my point that I'm trying to make.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a hospital, and at that hospital there was a doctor, but also Oisango. So like she's a doctor, Western doctor, but Oisangoma, she comes she comes just as a Sangoma, but with the white coat. You know, like how a Muslim will wear their regalia and then put on a white coat. And people who were at the hospital, specifically abantu abamnyama, black people, and kwakhona ngisho isangoma there, he was like, udokotela ngampela lo, Sangoma. How does that happen? Yeah, well, and it wasn't even as curiosity, it was more of a, how can someone Sangoma have the ability ukusafunda udoctor? It was that type of a demeaning situation. So I find that Indigenous healers are viewed as below or daughter. Like I once said, Mina, if I had to choose between which healing method I want, I would rather go with the African. And then people were like, no, the Western is better because it's tried and tested. And it's like tested on what? Animals. Tested on, like, let's be real now. Why are we saying that one is better than the other when both have been tried and tested for ages and one for longer than the other?
Yeah.
So yeah, there is that level of undermining the sector as if it's not something that can be taken seriously.
Yeah.
That's my thoughts.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about the impact of that then on the individual that's actually doing it, because there's pride in knowing that you're being recognized, you're being appreciated and given a place. But if you know that you're doing all of this for people who at the end of the day are not really, appreciating you. So what does that do to you as an individual? Yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Brother Menzi, before we finalize this, or maybe you can just talk a bit about some of the methods that we use as Indigenous practitioners, just like you've just showed us, like burning incense or tobacco, to calm ourselves and deal with our conditions. So perhaps you can touch on that a bit. Or that is, yes, the herb.
This herb is part of the solution and also part of the problem. This herb is the solution and part of the problem. I raise the issue of this herb because, again, just like I was raising the issue of artists and Indigenous healers finding themselves traumatized in similar ways, so do the movement called Rastas. You know the Rastas?
Yes.
The Rastas also are outliers. They suffer from a lot of mental health conditions that are based on other overusing of the herb and over indulging in a certain kind of thinking, you know, what's the word? A combative thinking. When you're thinking combatively all the time, you have to be you have to be defensive all the time. You're becoming defensive because you are being attacked for just choosing not to eat meat, for example. You will find yourself
Tell me about it.
every single day you have to defend your right not to eat meat or not to drink alcohol or not, whatever. If you're like a Rasta. So you find these things, it's almost like water under bridges. When a Rasta man gets sick and gets sent to a mental hospital, the people, or he doesn't get that chance if he's just suffering like that. People say, no, it's obvious because Benitang, you know, it's obvious. But, you know, they don't say the same thing about alcohol. But, well, maybe they do, depending if it's like on a higher level of abuse. But the point I'm making is that it is those people who are closest to nature and those who are who aspire to a natural harmony between men and women, person and nature, and person to person, you know, and person to cosmos. So the life that we live now is so complicated, is so deliberately complicated. It's complicated by the fact that those who want to be to simplify it will suffer for trying to just simplify life and make it organically progressive. But later, when the world catches on, they fail to acknowledge how these people have been talking about this herb as a healer for hundreds of years. And these Zangoma are using this herb, but they've been hiding. But now that it is out in the open, it's being legalized, it's being what, everybody's talking about it. Other people have shops, those who have economic means, have shops that can purvey it. You find that the very same thing, this is stigmatized, that has caused a stigma on certain people. It is now slowly being reversed. So now that's why it's important also in this conversation to never forget the impact of capitalism also, because capitalism and colonialism and religion, authoritative religion, authority, you know, it's
yes.
It ends up basically replicating the trauma, you know. So it's important for us to, when we kind of approach these questions, to approach them with a real sense of compassion and a sense of it is holistic. You can't deal just with the mental health unless you deal with the economic condition and the living condition of the sufferer, as Rasta would say. Yeah, blessed.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Sister Dolores, do you have anything else to add before we close?
I think we've covered everything, especially in terms of my side.
Yes. All right. Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much. So that is it. Last session related to mental health within the Indigenous sector. So if you want us to continue with this conversation, you want us to delve a bit deeper into some aspects of it, just leave a comment, send us an email or find us on our
subscribe
platform and do subscribe. And if you also want to come into the show, you are more than welcome to it. This is a space that is open for conversations, anything related to well-being within the Indigenous sector. So thank you so much.
Rejoice, rejoice.